Khazars that I didn't know, and I wanted to share some of this knowledge with you. Without the Khazars, the history of Europe, let alone the world, would have been quite different. So, let's get right into it. Who were the Khazars, and where did they come from? This is a question that has many general answers, but not many specific ones. Most scholars in the field believe that the Khazars were a predominantly Turkic-speaking people who likely originated from the steppes of Central Asia or the Ural Mountains. However, the specifics of these origins are still somewhat obscure due to the fact that they left few archaeological remains from their early years. There have, though, been many conflicting writers and historians who have speculated on Khazar origins. For example, one of their contemporaries from the early 9th century, the Greek historian and monk Theophanes, called the Khazars Eastern Turks. The Arab chronicler and historian Al-Masudi wrote in the 10th century that, and I quote, "The Khazars are a tribe of the Turks." Even the Chinese claim to have known of the Khazars, as a chronicle known as the Ta'ang Shu stated that the Khazars, and I quote, "belong to the stock of the Turks." Even after their conversion to Judaism, most Jewish scholars maintain that the Khazars were Turks. Syriac writings also more or less say the same thing. In addition, descriptions of their horseback riding and battle formation techniques generally describe a style that was similar to many Turkic peoples of Central Asia. So, using the info just mentioned, for our purposes, we'll conclude that the Khazars were indeed a Turkic-speaking people originally from the steppes of Eurasia. The Khazars' neighborhood was anything but boring. To their east and west were nomadic Turkic tribes. In the south, of course, were the Byzantine Empire, Armenia, and the Persian Sasanian Empire. By the 5th century, the Khazars were powerful and threatening enough that the Sasanian kings, Kavad I and his son, Khusru I, had to specifically build fortresses along the borders of their empire to ward off Khazar raids. The most famous of these fortresses was Derbent, still standing today. In the 7th century, the Khazars seized several territories north of the Black Sea, forcing the Bulgar tribes that had been living there to flee, some to the north and others into southeastern Europe, to the place that bears their name today, Bulgaria. Others were simply content to live under Khazar rule. Of course, these expansions didn't go unnoticed by the other great power in the region, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. However, instead of facing them in battle, early Byzantine emperors chose instead the path of diplomacy and flattery, offering valuable gifts and even their daughters as wives to Khazar rulers. Such alliances proved useful, as when the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius was able to leverage his ties with the Khazars in his war with the Sasanian Empire. In reality, the Byzantine-Sassanid wars actually proved to be a distraction from the real threat to both empires. This threat, of course, was the Arabs, who for the first time, at least in recent history, had united together. Bursting almost unexpectedly from the Arabian Peninsula, they were fighting not just for land and plunder, but to spread their religion, Islam. In the early battles outside of Arabia, they smashed the Sasanian Empire and forced the Byzantines to forever fall back to Anatolia. By 640, the Arabs had invaded Armenia. This put them on a collision course with the Khazars who, at least since the 630s, had been entrenched in what is today Azerbaijan. In 642, the ambitious Arab general Abdurrahman ibn Rabi'a al-Bahili attacked Khazaria. The sources from the time period don't tell us much other than that they met and fought a few battles that were more like large skirmishes. However, as the Arabs started becoming more familiar with the northern reaches of their new empire and adjusting to its climate, their confidence in pushing northward increased. In 651, they launched another invasion of Khazaria. Instead of trying to take the legendary fortress of Derbent, they instead went around it and made it almost to the Khazar capital of Balanjar, where ultimately they were defeated and apparently lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 men. One of the slain was a prominent Muslim commander named Salman ibn Rabi'a. He was actually the brother of Abdurrahman ibn Rabi'a, the Arab general I just mentioned who first waged war on the Khazars in 642. Both sides, though, were not content to let the conflict end. The Arabs may have lost the current battle, but it was very clear that they'd return, and in greater numbers. It was also becoming obvious that they were not just a threat to the Khazars, but to the other peoples of the Caucasus region as well. Thus in 655, a Khazar army was assembled in the city of Samandar, which later on met up with Abkhazian and Alan warriors. Some sources claim that the Byzantine emperor also sent supplies and auxiliary troops. Marching south, the army met an Arab Muslim force that was under the command of Habib ibn Maslama, a veteran of many battles, especially in the Levant. Though a brilliant commander, Maslama was greatly undermanned. However, Maslama and other Arab commanders were mostly able to hold the line due to their more sophisticated weapons and tactics. The stalemate between the two sides went on for about 15 years, with neither side gaining much in terms of territory. However, political turmoil and eventually civil war encompassed the Muslim world. In 661, the fourth and last of the so-called rightly guided caliphs, Ali ibn Abi Talib, the son-in-law and cousin of the Prophet Muhammad, was assassinated. His death sparked a civil war as to who would succeed him. This is essentially the beginning of the Sunni-Shia rift in the Islamic world, something we'll no doubt talk about in future programs. However, for our purposes here, the internal chaos within the Arab Muslim Empire weakened their hold on the areas of Georgia and Armenia, allowing both of them to kick out their Muslim governors and become independent. It also gave the Khazars breathing room. They were able to regroup, reorganize, and eventually expand further south into the regions of the southern Caucasus and occupy many of the lands that the Arabs were forced to abandon. The problem, though, was that now it was the Khazars rather than the Arabs who were seen as the oppressors. This is at least according to the chronicles of a certain Pilan of Tirak. He claims that the Khazar army invaded Caucasian Albania, Armenia, and Georgia, destroying much of it, plundering its cities, and taking many prisoners. We're also told that in August of 685, Khazar forces defeated the armies of all three of these nations, with the kings of Armenia and Georgia falling in battle. However, by this time, power within the Muslim world had been consolidated under the Umayyad dynasty of caliphs, who ruled from Damascus, Syria. The Umayyads renewed their efforts to take back the Caucasus region. Generally outnumbered and knowing that they had little chance of defeating the Khazars in pitched battles, the Arab Muslim forces used other, you could say more political strategies. These often entailed using propaganda, bribes, and other means to get the local population to cut off support or openly turn against their Khazar overlords. These tactics worked especially well along the southern frontiers of Khazaria, where the Khazar forces were generally unpopular with the locals. By 692, the Umayyads were again able to control much of Armenia. It's here that they consolidated their rule, and they didn't raid further into Khazar territory for a couple of decades until the year 1713 or 1714. That's when Maslama ibn Abdul Malik, a highly experienced commander and warrior, made his move. Maslama wasn't just any commander. He was one of the sons of Caliph Abdul Malik ibn Marwan and the half-brother of the future caliphs Al-Walid I, Suleiman, Yazid II, and Hisham, all of whom had relatively short reigns. Maslama was also a veteran of several major campaigns against the Byzantine Empire, including the siege of Constantinople. In fact, it's said that he was passed over from becoming caliph because his mother, being a slave, was not of noble birth. Anyway, Maslama laid siege to and eventually captured the fortress of Derbent. This was a significant blow to the Khazars. In retaliation, in 716 the Khazar general, Alp, along with reportedly 80,000 men, recaptured some of the territory Maslama had previously taken, and then he moved further south into Azerbaijan. Muslim forces, though again superior in terms of resources and technology, did not have the manpower to hold off the Khazars in both the Caucasus Mountains area and Azerbaijan, so they left for Arab-occupied Armenia, where they would be able to rest and regroup. Now, this is not the last time that we'll see